Okay, everybody, you've probably heard the situation that happened in North Carolina. Say the name Irina Zarutska. Irina Zarutska was just riding public transit. By the way, she was a refugee from Ukraine, of all places. And she came to Charlotte, North Carolina. And a terrible person, well, you saw what happened. I can't describe it here on TikTok without some sort of community guideline being violated. But if you haven't seen the video, you absolutely should. This individual should not have been on the streets, 14 prior arrests. And it really makes you wonder, why are we putting up with this? Why are we allowing so many people that have committed these crimes to keep on being released? The magistrate judge continued to release this individual, and this is a horrific thing. You know, it's really interesting. The media was totally covering George Floyd, tens of thousands of articles, reconfigured and changed the entire American body politic. And when it came to Irina Zarutska, the entire media was quiet, silent. In fact, we forced them to cover the story. Why do you think that is?
How does an ordinary day unravel into something that changes everything? A man prepares for what looks like a routine evening, unaware that the final hours of his life are already in motion. He smiles, he walks, he speaks, and to anyone watching, nothing seems out of place. But history teaches us that moments that appear the most ordinary can hold the weight of something irreversible. This is not a story about politics or public debates. This is the story of a crime, one that shook families, unsettled a university, and forced a community to ask questions that still have no easy answers. Behind every headline is a human life, and behind every courtroom door are parents, siblings, and friends waiting to understand why. On that evening, Charlie Kirk was not giving a speech, nor standing before cameras. He was a man moving through his day, speaking with people, preparing for tomorrow, making choices that seemed routine. Yet within hours, he would be gone. The very same footage you see here, captured just 4 hours before his assassination, is among the last recorded images of him alive. What happened between this moment and the gunfire that followed has been described in fragments, in surveillance clips, in court filings, and in the voices of those who ran when the shots rang out. Each detail feels clear when viewed alone, but when pieced together, they reveal a story clouded with contradictions and unanswered questions. Was this an act born of planning, or the product of something more immediate, more chaotic? In the course of this video, we will examine the hours leading up to the crime, the chaotic aftermath, and the investigation that placed a young man named Tyler Robinson at the center of it all. We will hear from prosecutors, revisit the haunting footage, and confront the reality of what justice now demands. And in the end, one question will remain. How could a day so ordinary collapse into a moment that left an entire community in shock? Before we move deeper into this story, I want to ask you for one thing. Subscribe to the channel if you believe cases like this must never be forgotten. And as you listen, share your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective matters, and every discussion brings us closer to understanding the truth. Your voice, combined with others, keeps these stories alive. To understand the weight of what happened, we must first return to the life of Charlie Kirk, not as a public figure, but as a man, a son, a husband, a father, and a colleague whose daily routines gave structure to those around him. Charlie was ambitious. He carried himself with determination, not only in the spotlight, but in private moments where family and friends saw a more human side. He had built a reputation that reached across communities, but his closest circle knew him as more than headlines or speeches. To them, he was a provider, a mentor, and a presence they could rely on. Those who knew him described someone constantly in motion. Meetings, events, phone calls, yet always leaving room for family dinners, check-ins with friends, or a quick laugh to ease a long day. He was a man driven not only by purpose, but by a belief that time, if used well, could leave something lasting behind. As with any life, there were contradictions. Ambition often pulled him far from home, while duty called him back. He balanced these worlds as best he could, stepping into public arenas when asked, and returning to quieter corners when needed. It was this rhythm of visibility and privacy that shaped his last day. On that day, Charlie's schedule was filled with the familiar. Meetings, appearances, conversations with those around him. To anyone watching, It seemed like nothing more than another entry in a long line of busy calendars. There was no warning, no signal that anything was about to rupture the ordinary. He greeted people. He spoke with ease. He moved from one space to another as he had countless times before. Each step now carries a gravity that was invisible then, because each step was moving him closer to an ending no one could have predicted. What you are about to see is among the final images of Charlie Kirk alive, captured only minutes before his death. At first glance, it is ordinary, a man going about his evening. Yet, knowing what followed, the footage carries a weight that words alone cannot fully capture.
Everybody, you know how it works. Question and answer. Also, thank you to Lane from Y Refi. That was great. Really appreciate it. And we're going to be here for a couple hours. Get comfortable. Bring the best libs that Utah has to offer, because we're going to have some fun together. Hey, I'm looking at you up here.
If you watched that clip, you saw what countless others would have overlooked. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just a man moving through the last routine moments of his life. And that is what makes it haunting. In those final minutes, everything seemed stable, when in reality, he was already walking in the shadow of what was to come. Friends later said he appeared calm, collected, unaware of any danger. Those closest to him have replayed that day endlessly, wondering if there was something, anything, that could have been done differently. But life rarely reveals its turning points until after the fact. Charlie Kirk's last day, on the surface, was no different than any other. Yet, it is within this ordinary frame that an extraordinary tragedy was about to unfold. The air that evening was heavy with anticipation. The campus of Utah State University was alive with movement, students hurrying across walkways, conversations echoing through courtyards, the kind of everyday noise that makes a place feel safe, ordinary. But within minutes, that sense of safety would be shattered forever. Charlie Kirk's presence on campus had drawn attention. Some people greeted him, some just passed by, unaware of what was about to unfold. Witnesses recall that he walked with a certain calm, a man who had plans, commitments, things left undone. He had no idea that his life was approaching its violent end. The shooting itself came with no warning. No build-up, no time to process. A sharp crack cut through the evening air, a sound that every person who heard it would never forget. At first, some thought it was construction noise, others a firecracker. But within seconds, confusion turned to terror as the reality sank in. People screamed. Some dropped to the ground instinctively. Others bolted, unsure of where the danger was coming from. Those who saw Charlie fall remember the sudden collapse, the disbelief on their faces as their minds struggled to catch up with what their eyes had just witnessed. For the next several moments, the scene was nothing but chaos. Shoes scraping against pavement, the sound of doors slamming as people rushed to safety, the cries of those who had seen too much. Before we go further, let's pause here. This is the moment where the world around Charlie Kirk unraveled in seconds. Here is the raw glimpse of what that chaos looked like, the very moments after shots rang out. People running in every direction, fear etched on their faces, the entire scene erupting into confusion. Even without seeing it, you can imagine the panic. Crowds scattering like waves breaking against the shore, each person desperate to escape, but not sure where safety could be found. That night, the university grounds transformed from a place of learning into a crime scene marked by terror. And in the middle of that confusion, Charlie Kirk lay motionless, his life ending before anyone could understand why. Witnesses say the sound of silence after the gunfire was even more haunting than the shots themselves, because it was the sound of realization that nothing would ever be the same again. Police sirens cut through the night within minutes. Officers swarmed the area, trying to make sense of the scene, to control the crowd, to secure what little evidence hadn't already been trampled in the chaos. Flashing lights illuminated shocked faces, Tears streaked across cheeks, and phones buzzed with frantic calls to loved ones. Something's happened. Charlie Kirk's been shot. The first responders worked quickly, but it was already too late. The community would soon learn that a life had been stolen, and the ripple effects of that moment would spread far beyond the campus. The crime scene itself became a haunting symbol. Police tape fluttering in the cold evening air. Uniformed officers standing guard. Students pressed back behind barricades, staring at the ground where only minutes earlier one of the most unexpected acts of violence had taken place. This was not just a shooting. It was a public unraveling of trust, a breaking of the ordinary world, and it left behind more questions than answers. The first minutes after the shooting were chaos. But for law enforcement, those minutes were critical. Officers cordoned off the area with yellow tape. Every inch of the campus suddenly transformed into evidence. Students and faculty were questioned, their words rushed and shaky, each describing the same moment from different angles. And yet, when those stories were compared, contradictions began to surface. Some witnesses claimed the shooter ran across the courtyard, disappearing into the crowd. Others insisted he slipped into a nearby building. A few swore they saw two figures, not one. In the haze of panic, details blurred, and law enforcement knew they would have to cut through layers of confusion to find the truth. Detectives gathered shell casings, bagged clothing, and secured cell phone footage from those who had the presence of mind to hit record. Surveillance cameras from a university provided fragments of movement, grainy outlines, and fleeting shapes. Nothing yet gave them a clear face. Still, suspicion began to form. A name surfaced quietly, whispered among investigators: Tyler Robinson. At first, it was just a possibility, one of many names in a growing list. But then came a moment that shifted everything. Before I play this, understand, what you are about to hear is not speculation. It is a public statement that connected a face from an FBI image to a name investigators could not ignore.
Robinson's mother stated that the following to police. On September 11, 2025, the day after the shooting, Robinson's mother saw the photo of the shooter in the news and thought the shooter looked like her son. Robinson's mother called her son and asked him where he was. He said he was at home sick, and that he had also been at home homesick on September 10th. Robinson's mother expressed concern to her husband that the suspect shooter looked like Robinson. Robinson's father agreed.
Here is Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray explaining how Tyler Robinson's own parents recognized something hauntingly familiar. When Robinson's parents saw the FBI's image, they admitted it resembled their son. That single acknowledgement, uttered with hesitation and sorrow, changed the course of the investigation. It wasn't just rumor anymore. Law enforcement now had a family connection, and the pieces began to align in ways too striking to ignore. Detectives followed leads relentlessly. Search warrants were drafted. Every digital trace, every text, every online footprint was examined. The narrative was shifting from uncertainty to focus, but suspicion is not the same as proof. Investigators knew that if they moved too fast, they risked losing everything in court. Meanwhile, the public grew restless. Headlines blared with speculation. Students held vigils, their candles flickering in the cold night air as they demanded answers. The media swarmed the story, filling in blanks with theories, each one spreading faster than the last. And behind the scenes, law enforcement was working under immense pressure. They weren't just chasing a suspect. They were piecing together a fractured truth, balancing the weight of public fear with the precision that justice required. This was the moment when the case stopped being about what happened and began shifting toward who was responsible. And slowly, inevitably, suspicion tightened its grip on one name: Tyler Robinson. Every high-profile case draws theories. Some are fueled by facts, others by fear, and some by the chaos of memory. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, the theories came fast. Was this an act of personal revenge? A targeted attack? Or was it the work of a troubled young man whose choices led him down a dark and irreversible path? At first, investigators considered the possibility of multiple suspects. Some witnesses were adamant. They claimed they saw more than one figure fleeing the scene. Others swore that the shooter acted alone, moving with such deliberate steps that it seemed pre-planned. In those early days, almost every possibility was entertained. But one name began to rise above the rest: Tyler Robinson. He was young, ambitious, and by all outward appearances, on a promising path. He had been accepted into university, celebrated by family and teachers. To those who knew him casually, there was nothing that screamed violent. Yet, the closer investigators looked, the more troubling the picture became. They discovered unusual movements on the day of the shooting. Robinson's vehicle had been tracked entering the area, and questions began to swirl about why he was there at that precise time. The pieces of his timeline began to reveal themselves, and with them came more suspicion. Here, a house camera captures Robinson arriving, his car pulling up and his figure moving purposefully toward the university. It was ordinary footage until the moment it became evidence in a homicide investigation. According to investigators, Robinson was recorded on a nearby house camera, parking his vehicle and making his way toward the university grounds. At the time, it seemed like nothing more than routine movement. But in hindsight, it placed him at the scene before the tragedy unfolded. As investigators traced his movements further, a troubling pattern emerged. Surveillance and eyewitnesses began to overlap, showing him in places that connected directly to the crime scene. One of the most chilling pieces of footage showed a figure believed to be Robinson positioned on the roof, an elevated vantage point, one that raised disturbing questions about planning and intent.
Getting right up.
Yeah. You think he'd already be in place?
You would think that. So there's somebody on the roof right there? Just saying?
Huh.
He just ran from, over, where's my finger? Well, from over there, ran in. And now he's right there. Just saying.
Authorities later described footage that appeared to show Robinson on a rooftop, overlooking the area where Kirk would be shot. To investigators, this wasn't a coincidence. It suggested preparation, positioning, the kind of detail that separated a random act from something deliberate. From here, theories multiplied. Some speculated that Robinson had acted out of personal resentment, though no direct link between him and Kirk could be firmly established at the time. Others believed it was the result of internal struggles Robinson was facing, conflicts invisible to those around him until they manifested in violence. And yet, others clung to the idea that Robinson might not have acted alone. The conflicting witness statements, the confusion in the aftermath, left lingering doubts. Could someone else have been involved? Was he a lone actor, or part of a larger story no one had yet uncovered? For investigators, separating rumor from evidence was a painstaking task. They weighed each possibility, tested every theory, and still, the picture seemed incomplete. Theories kept the public engaged, but law enforcement knew that theories were not enough. They needed proof that would either confirm Robinson's role or reveal someone else entirely. And by this stage, Robinson was no longer just a suspect. He was becoming the suspect. Every investigation eventually reaches a moment when the balance tips, when questions give way to answers, and speculation hardens into something undeniable. In the case of Charlie Kirk, that moment came with the discovery of key footage. Up until then, there were doubts. Witness accounts conflicted. Theories multiplied. Some clung to the idea of mistaken identity, while others believed the suspect's presence was circumstantial. But what investigators uncovered next removed any lingering uncertainty. Here, in a clip that investigators would later call one of the most damning pieces of evidence, Robinson is seen in the aftermath of the assassination. He moves quickly, leaving behind the chaos that erupted seconds earlier. This is not speculation or theory. It is the raw moment captured, the lens freezing his escape in time. Investigators obtained footage that appeared to show Robinson fleeing the scene immediately after Kirk was gunned down. It was movement tied directly to the timeline, narrowing the margin of doubt to almost nothing. That one sequence transformed him in the public eye, from suspect to presumed killer. But the power of this moment is not only in what it showed. It was in what it revealed about the distance between who Robinson had been and who he had now become. Because before this crime, Tyler Robinson had been a young man with promise, a student preparing for higher education, a son whose family believed in his potential, someone who, not long ago, was being celebrated for achievement rather than scrutinized for murder. Here, we see Robinson in a different light. He reads aloud the letter awarding him a presidential scholarship, a symbol of recognition, a step into a future filled with opportunity. In that moment, he was not a suspect. He was a student with a bright path ahead.
Okay.
Congratulations. You have been selected to receive the Resident Presidential Scholarship from Utah State University. The value of this scholarship is approximately $32,000. This scholarship is available for 4 years or 8 semesters.
Investigators and journalists later uncovered a video of Robinson proudly reading a letter of acceptance, announcing he had been chosen for a prestigious presidential scholarship. It was a reminder that, before this tragedy, his story looked nothing like the one the world would come to know. The contrast was staggering. On one side, the image of a young man smiling, proud, sharing news of his academic success. On the other, the shadow of that same figure, accused of pulling the trigger that ended Charlie Kirk's life. This duality, promise and destruction, pride and violence, formed the breaking point of the case. It was no longer about theories or conflicting memories. The story had split in two: the person Robinson had been and the person investigators now claimed he had become. And from here, there was no going back. The case shifted from investigation to prosecution. The community, once bewildered, now faced the reality of a suspect whose fall from promise to violence seemed almost unthinkable. It was the moment when hope for doubt dissolved, the moment when evidence overwhelmed uncertainty, and the moment when the name Tyler Robinson stopped being just another possibility and became the face of the crime itself. In every case, the investigation eventually hands its weight to the courtroom. The evidence, the footage, the timelines, all of it must be tested against the law. For the family of Charlie Kirk, and for the community that had been shaken by sudden loss, this stage brought no relief. Instead, it brought another kind of waiting for justice to take shape. Tyler Robinson was formally charged, his name no longer whispered as a theory, but spoken aloud as the accused. Each court date drew drew attention, each appearance a reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. Cameras captured the scenes. Reporters filed in. Families sat in silence, searching for answers in every word and gesture. Here, Robinson appears in court. The young man once seen opening a scholarship letter now stands accused, facing a judge, the weight of an entire community's grief pressing down in that room.
Tyler James Robinson.
Calling case 251-403-576, State of Utah versus Tyler James Robinson. Could you state your name?
Tyler James Robinson.
So, Mr. Robinson, you have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, the court can appoint an attorney to represent you. I have reviewed your declaration of financial status and find that you are indigent. I'm provisionally appointing a Rule 8 qualified attorney to represent you on your case, Mr. Robinson. Along with the filing of their appearance of counsel, the assigned attorneys must file declarations with the court that outline their qualifications under Rule 8 and Rule 8C, under Rule 8B and Rule 8C for counsel appointment in a case where death may be a sentencing option. I'm ordering that those declarations be filed prior to the next hearing date, which is set for September 29th at 10 a.m. Mr. Robinson, I also wish to inform you of your rights against self-incrimination. Anything that you say in court today could be used against you, and we want to protect your constitutional rights. Mr. Robinson, at this time, you will remain in custody without bail. Is there any other business that we need to address today, counsel?
Just for the court's information, we did file just recently, within the last few minutes, a notice of intent to seek the death penalty that was filed by Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray. So that should be in the court's file. Lastly, I would just indicate to the court and to, at this point, Mr. Robinson, that we are prepared to collect all of the discovery in this matter and get that turned over to the defense as soon as possible. Rule 16 requires us to provide what we have relied on in charging the information and bringing these charges within 5 days once it's requested. So that'll be prepared to disseminate to the defense as soon as possible.
According to local coverage, Robinson appeared in court for his hearings, sitting quietly as charges were read and prosecutors laid out their case. To those watching, the contrast was jarring. This was no longer the proud student in front of camera. It was the image of a man facing the gravest accusations of his life. As the trial progressed, prosecutors signaled their intent to pursue the most severe outcome possible. They argued that the evidence was overwhelming, that the crime demanded the highest accountability. For Robinson, the stakes shifted from the possibility of prison to something far more final. Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray filed a notice of intent to seek the death penalty, standing before the press and explaining the state's decision. His words carried the weight of finality, of consequences that stretched beyond one courtroom and one defendant.
Following the press conference, I am filing a notice of intent to seek the death penalty. I do not take this decision lightly, and it is a decision I have made independently as county attorney, based solely on the available evidence and circumstances and nature of the crime. Because we are seeking the death penalty, the defendant will continue to be held without bail in the Utah County Jail.
Utah County Attorney Jeff Gray formally announced the filing of a notice of intent to pursue the death penalty. In his statement, he emphasized the severity of the crime, saying that under the circumstances, the state would seek the harshest punishment available under law. The announcement stunned many. For some in the community, it was a necessary step, a response they believed matched the gravity of what had been done. For others, it was another tragedy layered upon the first, the possibility of one life ending because another had already been taken. Meanwhile, the Kirk family continued to endure the weight of absence. They sat through hearings, surrounded by supporters, but marked by the void of a son, a brother, a loved one taken too soon. Their grief became part of the story, their faces reminders of why the case mattered. And beyond the family, the wider community wrestled with questions that stretched beyond the single case. How could someone so young, someone who had once stood as a symbol of promise, become the center of such devastation? Could the justice system truly bring closure, or only a verdict? As of now, the case continues its path through the courts. Robinson remains at the center of it all, awaiting a future that will be decided not by scholarship letters or academic achievements, but by the judgment of a jury. And for the family of Charlie Kirk, the wait for justice is a daily weight they continue to carry. In the end, one fact remains unshaken. Charlie Kirk is gone, taken on an ordinary day in a way no one could have imagined. The evidence, the trial, the theories, they circle around the same painful truth. Yet beneath all of it lies a question that lingers, heavy and unresolved. The truth of what happened that night may only be fully known by one person. The man accused of pulling the trigger. The man who once read a scholarship letter with pride and now sits in a courtroom facing the weight of life and death. Will the full story ever be revealed? Or will parts of it remain forever out of reach? For the Kirk family, and for a community still searching for closure, that question is more than just legal. It is personal. It is about memory, loss, and the hope that answers might one day bring peace. Now I want to turn that question to you. What do you think happened? Do you believe the evidence points clearly to Robinson, or are there details that still leave you wondering? Leave your theories in the comments below. I read every one, and your voice is part of this conversation. And if you believe these stories must be told, if you believe the names of victims and the lessons of these cases should never fade, then subscribe to this channel. Every subscription keeps these stories alive, ensures they are heard, and helps us continue to uncover cases that cannot be forgotten. Because in the silence after the headlines fade, only one question still remains: will the full truth of that night ever come to light?